Here is Bernie Sanders speaking at the convention. He was the only one who mentioned like issues. He was very frank about like, I don't agree with Biden on a lot of stuff, but there's some, broad principles we share, which, shares more than certainly with Republicans. But at the same time, they're not even talking about the public option now, right? I mean, that was sort of what Biden was talking about, public option, as opposed to just sort of increased subsidies. Put in a real public option. They're dropping Medicare to 60 under Biden's plan. They were dropping it to 55 under Clinton. I guess the only...
he's not going to have an option soon. It's just not going to happen. It's just not. There's no way we come out of the pandemic and he can get away with it. Congress is going to have to do something. They're going to have to do something, and it's going to come from Congress. It's not going to come from Biden. This is a fantasy land we're living in right now. To appease his donors, whatever it is, they're going to be in a big. He's going to whatever 2008 was, multiply that times 10 crises.
I agree totally. Here's Bernie basically saying, let's protect the future of the democracy. I mean, let's listen to the clip first. Mm-hmm.
My friends, I say to you, to everyone who supported other candidates in the primary, and to those who may have voted for Donald Trump in the last election, the future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our economy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake. We must come together, defeat Donald Trump, and elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as our next president and vice president. My friends, the price of failure is just too great to imagine. Thank you.
I mean, the pitch is basically like, you don't want to reach for the stars because you're on a very precarious ladder. Is what he's saying. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to, right? Like the risk is too great to not really pursue. And I tend to agree. I also think that there is a much better chance Bernie Sanders is going to be far more empowered. AOC is going to be far more empowered under a Biden-Harris administration than they would a Trump administration, just in terms of like the ability to get stuff done, even if it's half a loaf. So that's just the reality at this stage. I mean, but we lost. I understand the race that counted.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. I agree with you. Now it's on my side. When the Democrats win, right, and if they win, whether they win the Senate, keep Congress, whatever it is. And the DNC, suddenly the actual power will be back in the establishment's hands. So what makes you think that they're not going to exercise that power over progressive movement? Because, yes, they'll be fighting off Republicans, but not in the same way that they were before.
Look, from a legislative perspective, I think that's going to be a mixed bag. But when Barack Obama won, you had no outside groups. All the outside groups were basically in the veal pen, as it were, and they had been starved of resources because they were all about access. There was nothing even remotely close to something like Justice Democrats, which had a mission of challenging Democrats. There's nothing remotely close to, Matriarch or other organizations which were completely. I mean, Obama said at this time in 2008, the word was out, June, July, August. You do not give money to outside groups, period, end of story. And these are outside groups that were basically like, outside groups. Outside groups insofar as like they needed to have transactional relationships with the Democrats. And even they were starved because Obama wanted to control. He was starting to, Obama for America was up and running, but that was shut down by December, basically.
Pushed into the DNC.
pushed into the DNC, just completely,
Obama.
disemboweled, as it were.
Yeah.
The dynamic is going to be very, very different. The dynamic is going to be very, very different going into this. And, Nancy Pelosi, if she's hanging on, she's just hanging on. There's nobody there who's going to believe that Nancy Pelosi is going to be there in 4 years. And so there's the dynamic is different. The terrain is different, where the American public is different. The American public is, they can ignore it maybe over the course of these 3 or 4 months, that 60% of voters under the age of 40, I think, voted for either Bernie or Warren, and the majority of those Bernie.
Mainly Bernie.
Yeah, mainly Bernie. But but I would imagine that those young people who voted for Warren subscribe to that same issue set, frankly. So it's not just about Bernie; it's about where they are on the issues, and 40's not that young. Like, you could ignore that when it's like 24 and under, but 40, not that young.
Yeah.
And so, within 2 cycles, they're in middle age. Like, I mean, this is where the party is going. And for younger politicians, right? Like even Hakeem Jeffries, for that matter, they're going to need to pretend, Hakeem Jeffries is going to have to pretend to pay some lip service. And he is. And the problem is that,
I should say, pretend to. He's pretending lip service. I want to make that very clear. It's not like he's.
But the problem that Hakeem Jeffries has when he pretends this is that the level of sophistication of the progressive voter today is much different than it was 15, 20 years ago. I'm sorry. Like, it's like, they're not going to get away with it.
Right.
And there's not going to be this presumption that because you're in the CBC that you are progressive. That's not going to happen anymore. Like, we're seeing this, where the CBC doesn't support Jamal Bowman. They support Engel.
White
guy. Right. I mean, like, their clown time is over in many respects. And so I don't think that we're going to get the progressive I don't think we're going to get even 60% of what progressives want. But the fact is that, like, we're going to get 40% or 30%. And the bottom line is like those losses between 30 and 75% of what we want, we're going to take a piece out of the establishment in this instance, because this is going to be, I'm just comparing this to 2008, where it was just like Joe Biden and Ken Conrad, they're standing in the way of this stuff and Evan Bayh and blah, blah, blah. People aren't going to get away with that stuff anymore. It's just not going to happen.
If you look at like 2006, do you remember after 2004, I should say, after Carrie was swift voted, all these organizations, the Democracy Alliance came together. All these like billionaire supposed progressives wanted to invest in and start organizations that hit on things like national security from a progressive perspective, or invest in like Move On for voting, or I can't remember all the organizations that existed back then, Latino Outreach. And they shifted, and they still exist. They shifted their investments. But I think a lot of those organizations, I mean, dare I say it, became more or less compromised because they were dependent on large dollar donations. And so I think the difference between this time around is even if there are organizations that are seemingly progressive that could potentially get compromised because they're leaning on higher dollar donors or institutional backers or whatever it is, because they just need to function in the long term, or have some sophisticated staff that didn't just come out of activism, but know how to win elections and know how to break down the maps and know how to, pick a poll or whatever it is. There's going to be another set of groups that pops up. And so that is what I think the difference is even if you, for every bought out, slightly compromised organization, whether you see it or not, another one's going to pop up. For every WFP, there's a sunrise.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about. With the Justice Dems and other groups like that, is that in by compromise. Now that's what we used to call the veal pen, and you're basically in there. The reason why they get compromised is because their funding is contingent upon their transactional relationship with those in power.
Yep.
Exclusively on that.
Yep.
Because they don't have any outside power and they don't have any outside donors. And so to get the big donor money, you need to go show that you have access to, look, I'm having lunch with the undersecretary of blah, blah, blah. And we're, this legislation sitting on their desk, and this piece of legislation is going to hit, Pelosi's desk or whoever's desk. And you need to show that to get the funding. And that's basically how it works. That structure is different now. And the reason why the Republicans, the reason why there was Democrats hate their base and Republicans fear theirs. The reason why the Republicans feared their base was because there were outside resources that those people had, whether it was, what's his face with, the Club for Growth or Koch brothers. I mean, they would go at Republicans, and the reason why they feared them was because they had power, they had money, and and
they were crazy. Like, there were crazy rich dudes who just had one issue that they cared about, usually taxes, that rubbed up against the establishment, the Bush era establishment. The Koch brothers weren't pro-Bush, by the way.
It wasn't just about taxes. I mean, get farce to freeze. The abortion. You got, I'm
thinking of the contract with America and that crap.
Yes. So, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. Let's see.